Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The French Widow by Mark Pryor. Narrated by Todd Mclaren. Chapter 1. The Killer. The outskirts of Paris glide past my train window, filling it with concrete apartment blocks and warehouses interspersed with streets of cramped brick-row houses. Streaks of rain cut jagged paths through the grime, and I wish they wouldn't, because I don't like to see this part of the city. Not just because it's ugly. The city's heartbeat is the River Seine, which brings tourists, products, services, and everything you need to live. It brings it all to and through the very center of the city. Tourists, too. And lovers, foreign and domestic, all are drawn to the water like mosquitoes to a stagnant pond. They hold hands and gaze at the river, hang those stupid padlocks of love on its bridges. There's not a romance born or experienced in this city that hasn't involved a picnic by the river, or a soulful gaze over its sparkling waters at night. On the flip side, 50 bodies are dragged out of the River Seine every year, in Paris alone. 1 a week. How many float through unnoticed, or sink to the bottom, never to be seen again? How many people are chopped into pieces and devoured by fish before they can be found, and pieced back together? Probably not too many of the latter, but my point stands. The River Seine is death soup. It's body broth. Well, it's cold in there, so maybe it's ghastly gazpacho. But you get the point. If you don't, let me repeat. Things are not what they seem. The same way people aren't. And as I cruise into the city center to take up my old room and my beautiful old house for a week, these graffiti-spattered warehouses and trash-filled alleys cut a little close to the bone. You'd never guess by looking at me that I'm planning something awful. Evil, even. But I am. And the wheels have been turning for a while. Is it better or worse when you do it to your own family, as opposed to a stranger, I wonder? If they deserve it, like in my case, then it has to be better. Strangers never deserve anything because, well, they're strangers. I checked my Rolex, a gold beauty that my father left me before he popped his clogs. I was impatient to be at the station, but then patience has never been a virtue for me. A momentary reflection in the window showed a few hairs out of place, so I pulled the comb from my jacket pocket and rectified the mess, and then spent a few seconds staring at the woman 3 rows ahead of me, but facing me across her table, just to make her uncomfortable. I don't do well when I'm bored. 15 minutes later, a limousine driver waited with my name on his iPad, and I gave him a frown because they used to hold pieces of paper with my name on it, which I preferred. I dropped my bags at his feet and let him figure out what to do with his iPad and 2 heavy suitcases as I walked out to the car. "In town for long?" he asked, once he'd buckled himself into his seat. "A week. Family reunion of sorts." "Those can be fun or fucking awful," I said with a smile, watching his eyes in the rearview mirror. "Well, I didn't want to say that, but yes. This one will be fun, I think." He looked down and then back at me. "The address I have, it's Chateau Lambourd. Is that right?" He sounded perplexed, and I knew why. "Yes, that's right." "Oh, I thought it was a museum now, just open to visitors. I live a few streets away, you see." "A museum, yes. But every year we have a family gathering and a party for Bastille Day." "So does that mean you're—" Yes, part of the Lambourd family. This was beginning to get tiresome. His head nodded for longer than it should, and then he said, "Do you mind if I ask? Is the legend true?" I sighed loudly. A legend is a story popularly regarded as historical, but generally not authenticated. The story of my family is not a legend. It's a story. A true one? I gave him an enigmatic smile, having learned that people love to hang on to a little mystery in their lives. I didn't want to dispel the romance around the myth of my family by making it real for him, cementing its truthfulness, so he could do the same for anyone he cared to tell. Thing being, the story is true, and it's a good one. Chapter 2. Hugo Marston sat in his office with both feet on the desk, admiring the tops of his oldest pair of Tony Lama boots. He'd bought them in Fort Worth 2 decades previously, and they were in that delightful stage between new and decrepit, a stage that would last another 10 years at least. They'd seen so much wear and so many buffings that they seemed to gleam from within, the cracks and creases adding character in the same way that wrinkles change the face of an aging but still beautiful movie star. Hugo's secretary, Emma, appeared in the open doorway with a mug of coffee in her hand. "You made me a second cup?" he asked. "What? No, this is mine." "Teas?" "Did you hear from the ambassador this morning?" "No. Something going on?" "He's trying to decide whether to go to a party on Bastille night." "I doubt he'd ask my advice on that," Hugo said. Emma smiled. "Right. Because if it involves you having to go too, your advice would be against attending." "Precisely." "You don't even want to know where the party is?" "I do not." "Not even a little curious?" Emma pressed. "No, and I'll tell you why. No matter how impressive the building, whether it's a chateau or the finest hotel, once you're inside, it's the same thing. Rich people in expensive clothes guzzling champagne and trying not to make it obvious how many canapes they're stuffing into their wealthy gullets. Hugo, be nice. And as the evening progresses, the same 1 or 2 people will consume just a little too much bubbly and start acting crazy until their significant other drags them out to the Mercedes and drives them home. And that's happening at an embassy party, a fashion after-party, and a Christmas party. Especially a Bastille Day party. "You're like the Grinch, you know that?" "Not at all," Hugo said. "Those people are welcome to get their fun that way. I wouldn't stop them." "You just don't want to see it." "Correct." "Well then, I'll be sure and tell the ambassador not to ask your opinion." She turned to go, looking over her shoulder to say, "Although this party's at Chateau Lambourd." "Lambourd." Hugo swung his boots off the desk. "Why do I know that name?" "Because of that book I keep telling you to read. If you'd put down your mystery novels for a moment and read some Paris history, you'd know all about it." Right, the Jewish family. The place is a museum." Emma sighed and turned back to Hugo, hesitating a moment before walking into his office and settling into a chair opposite him. "Yes," she said. "Most of the year it's a museum. But that's not the interesting thing." "Tell me." "You mean remind you?" "Yeah, that." Hugo gave her his most innocent smile. "I think it was around 1890 when it all started." "I do enjoy story time," Hugo said. He swung his boots back onto the desk, but Emma swatted them back down. "That's rude when you have a guest in here." "You're an employee, not a guest." "That's rude, too." "I was just trying to get comfortable." "Do you want to hear the story or not?" she asked. "Is there murder and intrigue in it?" Oh, yes, Emma smiled. Aplenty. Then by all means proceed, please. It was in 1890 that Nissim Lambourd moved here from Algeria, where he'd made his fortune selling silks and other cloths. He bought land beside Parc Monceau and designed Chateau Lambourd himself, with help from an architect friend. He lived there with his wife Beatrice and their son, Guillaume. Eventually, Guillaume inherited the place when his parents died, and had 2 children with his wife, whose name I forget. Alice, maybe. This isn't the most compelling story I've heard, Emma, Hugo shrugged. I mean, lineage stuff? I was promised murder. Hush, it gets better. So Guillaume and Alice's kids were Alexander and Charlotte. Ah, yes, that's a great improvement. Do tell me about their kids, please. I will, but not yet. Because what's interesting about Alexander was that he was a fighter pilot in the Second World War. Only he was killed in 1943. How? France was out of the war at that point. He flew for the British. Meanwhile, his sister and parents were living at Chateau Lambourd. Only the Germans had their eyes on the place. Of course. Lovely house, great setting. Perfect place for some German efficiency to be installed. Not just that, Emma said. The Lambourds were Jewish. Ah, right. Yes. And they saw the writing on the wall, so they packed Charlotte off to Luxembourg under a false name, with falsified papers and quite a lot of their belongings. There she married some banker. How old was she? 17 or 18, Emma said. While she was safely out of the country, sure enough, the Germans took over the house, and both her parents, who'd refused to leave, were sent to concentration camps. Did they survive? Hugo asked. Sadly, no. But this is where it gets good. Finally. She ignored the sarcasm. Immediately after the war, Charlotte came back to Paris with her husband. Looking to reclaim the chateau, I presume. Right. Only she couldn't prove who she was because her family had destroyed any record of her, to protect her in case the Germans caught her while fleeing. And of course the parents were dead, so they couldn't speak up. She was stuck with her false name, Hugo said. Very much so. And while a few friends in Paris tried to help, the lack of paperwork did her in. And of course the new owner of the house was wealthy and influential enough to block her claim. So what happened? I'm glad you asked. Emma gave him a wicked smile. Her banker husband, the one from Luxembourg, was found dead in Parc Monceau. Murdered? You did promise me a murder. Unless he stabbed himself in the back and slashed his own throat. Let me guess, Hugo said. No one was ever caught. Correct. And within the year, our merry widow was married to the owner of Chateau Lambourd. Didn't waste any time, did she? There wasn't much to waste, Emma said. Meaning? He was a rich man, at least twice her age, she said. Married him for his looks and vitality, then. Well, he was vital enough, Emma said primly. She was in her 40s, but they had 4 children, although I think the last one was adopted. Impressive. Who owns the house now? One of them, I assume. Nope. Emma stood. Charlotte is still alive. A widow once again. She owns it, and it's her party the ambassador has been invited to. She's alive? Hugo's eyes lit up. How old is she? Mid-90s, I suppose. Still formidable, although she has a live-in nurse. Emma smiled. You should go. Maybe you could get her to confess to murdering her first husband. What about her second? Was that a suspicious death? No idea. You can investigate that, too. Maybe I should. Hugo nodded slowly, deep in thought. The Black Widow of Parc Monceau. That'd be quite something, wouldn't it? 4 hours later, Hugo powered down his computer, stood up, and stretched out his lower back. He was up to date with returning emails and other pending tasks, and was ready for a glass of wine. He stepped out of the embassy to begin his walk home, and looked up at a blue sky he'd not seen all day. The usual July heat had been swept out of Paris by a cool front from the east, one that had sprinkled the city with raindrops for a couple of days before leaving behind a picture-perfect day. He strolled down Avenue Gabriel toward the expanse of parkland that would lead him toward the Louvre, and eventually a nice glass of wine. As he walked, his mind turned to the story Emma had told him. In truth, Hugo was not one for parties, especially formal ones, but he was a sucker for history, and a complete and total sucker for an historical murder mystery. He took out his phone and called the one person who might know more than Emma about the Lambourd story. Her voice sounded strained when she answered.
"Hugo, how are you?"
"Fine. You?"
"Busy wrapping up a story. My editor had a few changes she wanted, so we've just finished fighting about that."
"Who won?"
"She did."
"Really? That surprises me."
"She's good at what she does, and I trust her judgment,"
Claudia said matter-of-factly.
"What's going on with you?"
"Wondered if you had time to share a carafe of cheap wine with me."
"You know perfectly well I don't drink cheap wine."
It was true. Born Claudia de Roussillon, she used the name Claudia Roux for her newspaper and magazine bylines to avoid the appearance of cashing in on her blue blood and distinctive name. But despite her honest and humble intentions, she'd been unable to shake her upbringing. Her first glass of port at the age of 16 had been a 1963 Cockburns. Her first glass of red wine, a 1947 Petrus, and her first and only car, a bulletproof Mercedes with a driver. Cheap hotels, economy-class flights, and the thin house wine served by so many bars and cafes were not things she endured, Hugo well knew. Not out of snobbery, but habit and custom.
"If I don't have to, why would I?"
she'd once asked him, and he had no good answer. Hugo named a cafe close to his apartment in Rue Jacob, in the 6th arrondissement of Paris, and she said she'd beat him there. He smiled at her competitive nature and hung up, but noticed he'd quickened his own stride subconsciously. He slowed and reminded himself that this was his commute to and from work, a stroll through the ever-changing royal garden of the Tuileries. On this evening, several families were taking advantage of the cooler weather to lay out blankets for picnics. One of those families, a husband and wife with 2 smartly dressed children, knelt on a dark red blanket in a circle, holding hands and their heads bent in prayer. Not far from them, an overweight father kicked a soccer ball with his toddler, who was dressed in the blue and white of the national team. Hugo had just passed the Musée de l'Orangerie, and vowed to himself yet again to stop in one day and admire the impressionist paintings it housed, when he heard 2 popping sounds ahead. A little early for Bastille Day fireworks, he thought. Seconds later, the rising swell of shouts and screams reached him, and when he heard 3 more pops, he knew they weren't firecrackers. Instinctively he started running. As he did so, he reached for the gun tucked under his arm, freeing it from the holster and holding it with both hands, barrel pointed to the sandy walkway. His eyes scanned ahead, past the people who were staring in disbelief, and past those who understood what they were seeing and were scattering in all directions. And then Hugo spotted him. He was 60 yards ahead and to the left, a burly young man wearing a tattered jacket with an army green pack on his back. He had a pistol in each hand and stood looking down at one of them, shaking it as if it had jammed. Hugo sped up, raising his own pistol, watching the man, but also angling his run so that there was no one behind him. Hugo was 30 yards away when the man threw the jammed gun to the ground in frustration and swung the pack off his back, kneeling in front of it. At 20 yards, the young man looked up and saw Hugo. Chapter 3. The man's face registered no surprise, but he immediately started to raise his gun toward the running American.
"Drop it!"
Hugo yelled in French.
"Drop your weapon now!"
The man either didn't hear or didn't care, and his gun was almost up when Hugo fired 4 shots in rapid succession. His first 2 rounds thudded into the dirt to the left of and behind the man, but the third hit the gun, ripping it from his hand and sending it spinning into the grass. The 4th shot slammed into the gunman's torso a split second later, knocking him backward onto the ground. Hugo slowed to a walk and closed the rest of the distance between them, his gun pointed at the man who lay sprawled on his back, not moving. Hugo's heart pounded in his chest, and his ragged breathing made it hard to keep a precise aim. Hugo was still working to catch his breath as he circled the still figure, surely just a teenager, looking for any signs of movement and any other weapon. His ears picked up the sounds of yelling and screaming all around him, and further away sirens, but his attention was locked onto the man on the ground. Hugo stepped closer and saw the entry wound, a circle of red slightly left of the center of his chest. Hugo quickly spotted the 2 guns and kicked them further away from the man, and then stooped to throw the backpack out of reach. The young man still hadn't moved, and from the placement of the hole in his chest, was unlikely to, so Hugo holstered his gun and knelt beside him. He put his fingers to his neck, but felt nothing except his own hands shaking with adrenaline.
"Hey! Are you hurt?"
The shout had come from a man with a crew cut, a fit young man who moved like an athlete and was running fast toward Hugo while holding a phone to his ear. "No, but this guy is," Hugo called back.
"I've called for an ambulance."
The man reached Hugo and stood over him, wariness on his face.
"I saw you shoot him, monsieur. Please tell me where your weapon is."
"In my shoulder holster," Hugo said. "Your police?"
"Militaire,"
the man replied. Hugo nodded and reached, slowly, for his embassy credentials, which the soldier scanned before handing back.
"Merci."
Hugo put them away quickly and swung one leg over the gunman, and clasped his hands left over right. He pressed them against the man's chest and felt blood spill through his fingers, but nevertheless began compressions. The rising wail of sirens told him help was close, but not close enough. "Do you know if anyone else was hurt?" Hugo asked the soldier who was on his cell phone. "Go look for victims. I heard 4 or 5 shots, but I don't know whether he hit anyone or not."
"Bien, I will."
The soldier jogged off, and Hugo focused on the steady beat of the compressions. More than a few people held their phones up, capturing the scene with cameras and on video for posterity. Or, more likely, their social media accounts. The grassy area all around him was littered with abandoned blankets, folding chairs, and picnic items. But people were starting to edge toward him, the uncertainty in their eyes mixed with curiosity. Hugo tried to ignore them and focus on the job at hand, but his arms were beginning to tire, and his breathing was labored. After another minute, the soldier returned.
"One is dead," he said. 2 other people are wounded, but they are alive and on their way to hospital."
"Merci. You mind taking over for a moment?"
"I don't know."
The soldier frowned and made no move to relieve Hugo.
"He killed someone and tried to kill more. He tried to kill you, n'est-ce pas?"
"Tried and failed."
"Then let him die. Or let God decide if he wants him to live."
The soldier glanced up, as if inviting advice from the heavens. "It'd help to know why he did this," Hugo said. his teeth gritted with the effort and with annoyance. "And for that we need him to live." The soldier looked at him for a moment and then shrugged. "Merde, I suppose so." He moved to Hugo's side and knelt, strong arms extending over the gunman. When Hugo took his hands away, they were covered in blood, and he wiped them as best he could in the dry grass a few feet away. He could see the police cars now, and 2 ambulances cruising through the Tuileries toward them, slowing to make sure they didn't hit anyone. They had shut off their sirens, but from both ends of the park an army of flashing blue, red, and white lights streamed toward them. The police vehicles nosed in closest, forming a circle around Hugo, the soldier, and the posse of onlookers, who were quickly ushered back behind the flashing lights. 2 medics jogged past the advancing police officers to where the soldier was starting to puff and sweat over his task, and he gladly moved out of the way to let them take over. When he stood, blood dripped from his hands, and he held them up, the frown back on his face. "If that bastard has any communicable diseases—" He shook his head and glared down at the gunman. "Agreed," Hugo said, and turned his attention to the 3 uniformed officers who'd approached. They'd not drawn their guns, but they looked like they might, so Hugo tried to reassure them. "Messieurs, my name is Hugo Marston. I am the regional security officer at the United States Embassy." The largest of the 3 moved closer. "You have identification?" "In my inside pocket, yes, but—" Hugo held up his bloody hands. "You're welcome to reach inside." The officer barked an instruction to his colleague, who ran to the trunk of one of the police cars. He returned a moment later with a plastic container of hand wipes. The fleek opened the lid and held the container out to Hugo and the soldier. "Take as many as you need, and you should go to the hospital to make sure you didn't catch anything." "We will," Hugo said, "and thank you." The burly officer, clearly in charge, stepped forward. "I am Brigadier Raphael Caron, and I will be in charge here until I'm not. First of all, our information is that there was only 1 gunman, monsieur. I need to make sure that is the case." Hugo nodded. "As far as I know, yes. I only saw him." The fleek looked at the soldier. "And you?" "Same. Just him." Hugo finished wiping his hands as best he could, and then he reached for his credentials, passing them to the senior officer, who spotted the holstered gun but didn't say anything. He looked over Hugo's badge and identification card and handed them back. "Merci," Caron said. "And now I need your gun, please." "My gun? I'm afraid that's not possible." "There will be an investigation, monsieur. That will include a look at this man's life, but also an autopsy and ballistics. For that we need your gun. It is standard procedure." "I know it is," Hugo said politely. "However, this gun is the property of the United States government, and I have diplomatic status, such that I am not required to hand it over." Caron bristled. "I don't understand why your government wouldn't want to assist us in this investigation as fully as possible." "You misunderstand," Hugo assured him. "I'd gladly let you have it. But since I don't own it, and since some lawyer or bureaucrat in Washington will have a fit if I hand it over, I just ask that you let me call my boss and get clearance." "Who is your boss?" "The U.S. ambassador to France." Hugo gave Caron a friendly smile. "It's okay. I have him on speed dial." Hugo called Ambassador J. Bradford Taylor and caught him enjoying an appetizer of olives and nuts, along with a tall Americano cocktail in the Hotel Crillon.
"Hugo, what's going on?"
"Hey, boss. You seen the news yet?"
"No. Why?"
Are you drinking already?
Sample complete. Ready to continue?